Back to pharmacology. We're going to talk about D50 today. This was, in the past, was given as a bolus. I'm going to move this into the IV dextrose infusions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. All right, this is how it's supplied. Most commonly, it's going to come in these pre-filled syringes over here. You can have it come in these little vials. This is typically your packaging here. This is usually going to come in a 25 gram, 50 milliliter volume. So your dose here is 25 grams. You can see, I know the picture here is just a bit blurry, but this is also 25 grams in 50 milliliters. All right, just a brief description of what D50 is. This is a very high concentration of dextrose, meaning sugar, in sterile water. This is also a hypertonic solution. This is very thick. The class, just like oral glucose, because it's a sugar, this is falling into the carbohydrates. And the indication for this is the hypoglycemic adult with altered mental status. D50 is primarily just for adults only. We have some other medications at a lower dose for children, which we'll cover in a different slideshow. All right, our contraindications. If we believe we've got a hemorrhagic stroke, we would not want to give this. Traumatic brain injuries for the fear of having intracranial hemorrhage. Obviously, if they were hyperglycemic, we would have no need to give this. I can't stress enough the precaution for this is infiltration. You can see here by the pictures, these were caused by infiltration. Is when you start when you make the IV stick and the needle goes out of the vein. Once you push the medication, it'll actually get into the tissues and muscle, and it is very necrotic. It'll crystallize and it will kill all the tissue surrounding it. This is why it's a contraindication if we think it's if we have a head bleed. We would certainly not want to have this crystallize in the brain. It would most certainly kill them. All right, our route, the only route you can give this is IV. And of course, anything IV can be given IO. This is a slow push. We want to use the largest vein available because this is such a thick, viscous fluid. We'd like to get no smaller than a 20 gauge catheter IV, preferably even larger if you can accommodate that. You can push through a 20 gauge, but it will have a lot of resistance to it. It will take quite a bit of pressure to push this thick, viscous fluid through it. So an 18 would be a much better choice if you had it. But if all you had was a 20 gauge, you could still use it, but certainly nothing smaller than that. This needs to be given with IV fluids, as I mentioned at the beginning. This was traditionally given as a bolus, but because of the amount of infiltration that was going on in the tissue necrosis, most of your protocols are now changing to having to administer this in addition to fluids. So you'll need to have a normal saline IV flowing, and most of your protocols are doing something like push 10 milliliters of D50 and then allow the IV to run for 10 to 20 seconds, and then you push 10 more fluid of D50 and then let the fluids run again. This is going to ensure that you've got a patent IV that's running the whole time. If there was any infiltration, you could catch it early, so you could minimize the necrosis. The dose, you'll hear a lot of the people that's been around for a long time call these the pre-filled syringe, they'll call them an amp. So this would be a full amp of it, meaning the entire 25 grams. And again, this is a very slow push. If the blood glucose were to remain low, you can repeat this again. Some of your protocols out there may recommend a lower dose or a half amp, meaning a 12.5 gram dose. Anytime we're considering D50, you need to have at minimum 2 blood glucose checks. The initial one, once you push the medication, you would have to reassess and check the blood glucose level again. I think that's going to about wrap up D50. If you got any questions, as always, feel free to hit me up.